if you're going to do anything for your connective tissue and your nervous system health, would be to, and also just to start listening to your body. Like when it gives you those cues, it's actually giving you a cue for a reason. It's your fascia trying to say like, hey, we've been sitting for, we're getting really dense here.
Hi, welcome to the Sober Spill. Today I'm very excited to have Jahara Sara Seitz, Somatic Occupational Therapist. Jahara is joining us today from California, and she's here to share her insights and exactly what is Somatic Occupational Therapy.
Thanks, Jana. So psyched to be here.
So first, just to start, can you just tell us what is occupational therapy?
Yeah. Usually a lot of people don't know what that is. They think it's someone who's going to find you a job, which is definitely could be an aspect of what occupational therapists do. But our primary purpose is to support people in engaging in what are called occupations, which are any activities we do in life that are meaningful or purposeful to us. So that could be just getting yourself dressed after you've had a stroke and learning how to do that again. Or it could be doing, higher intensity sports like skiing or biking, and you've had an injury and you need someone to support you and being able to get back to those routines. So it really spans a broad range of ways that we can work. And what's unique about occupational therapy is that we work at the intersection of mental health, spiritual health, physical health, and we see the whole person. We also look at environments and how our environments affect our ability to participate. So at its core, it's a holistic profession.
It's really interesting. And when you say that, like our occupations, I'm thinking even just like in the moment, like in vivo. Mm-hmm. So where would an occupational therapist work? Where does one practice as an occupational therapist?
Lots of different places. So I've actually myself worked in different settings. I've worked with kids in sensory integration, which is helping kiddos who have sensory processing difficulties. Mm-hmm. I've worked in skilled nursing, which is like a post-acute setting after people have had strokes or hip replacements or brain injuries, helping them to get back home. I've worked in acute settings where it's like intensive rehab. Also, again, working with a lot of neurological conditions. You can work in school settings. You can work in community settings and private practice, which is what I do primarily.
Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. So a broad span and like sort of breadth of where you can actually be. Mm-hmm. What, and I noticed too, I love your website. It's beautiful. Wild thanks. Radiance, I believe, is your
Radiance.
Radiance. Mm-hmm. And what is a somatic occupational therapy?
Yeah. So me and a colleague of mine, she also has a private practice in Washington. We both started practicing in private practice. Well, we were both in private practice before we became OTs. Mm-hmm. And then we became OTs and we integrated a lot of the work that we were doing prior to graduate school into and interweaving what we learned as occupational therapists into one. And so what somatic occupational therapy is a weaving of different somatic modalities and practices into supporting people in engaging in the habits, roles, routines, activities that are meaningful to them. So an example would be if someone has had a traumatic experience and they're really disconnected from their body and they're having a lot of anxiety, they might come to me and work with me on self-regulation and understanding their sensory system, doing myofascial work, which I can talk a little bit more about, to help activate what are called proprioceptors. And those are part of our sensory system that helps our body to relax and to downregulate. And so the hands-on deep touch pressure activates those proprioceptors, which in turn helps with self-regulation, which in turn helps that person engage in their life activities. So it's really about creating pathways to engagement. And I like to think of occupational therapist also as like the original coach, like we see the big picture and how do we help with habits and routines. And as a somatic occupational therapist, I'm really focusing in on the body-mind connection. Like how can we keep that body-mind connection really healthy so that that clients can make choices that are supporting their overall self-regulation and then their joy and radiance, in their life. I mean, hence why I called my business Radiance Therapy. I really want people to feel like I'm living a radiant life. I'm not living a stressed life, that they're really living a life that feels full, but not too full.
That's what I want to talk to you definitely about, the not too full. I mean, I think a lot in recovery, we talk about like a life worth living, and a meaning, purpose driven life, and how to find that when you get sober or working towards sobriety or whatever your form of recovery is.
Yeah.
So it's interesting hearing about this integration of spirituality, mental health, physical health, and then also the world, the way we engage with the world. That's really incredible. It's a lot of different touch points.
Yeah, for sure.
I did want to go back to like that, what you had mentioned was that the fascia, about anxiety and fascia and the pressure points. Can you just share a little bit, like, what is fascia?
Yeah. So fascia is, I could literally do like a 3-hour podcast with you on fascia. But let me describe it first for someone who's like, I don't even know what that word is.
That would be me. Yeah.
Yeah. So fascia is actually something that, unfortunately, in medical programs, in my occupational therapy program, when we did dissections, in physical therapy programs, where it's the part of the body that's actually taken out often and thrown away. And it is incredibly important. I mean, research now is just showing us, oh my gosh, we made a big mistake. Like, we really want to understand fascia, because it actually is what we self-assembled from in the embryo. Meaning, like, people think of the fascia as like that outer coating on, say, chicken. Like, when you have a fresh chicken and you have that like slimy outer coating.
Like what you would think of as the skin?
Yeah. Like it's like the skin under the skin.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The slimy stuff under the skin. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yes, that is fascia, but literally think about that as everywhere, from like the most superficial, the most outer part of our body to like every living cell. It is wrapping around everything. And it is the most sensory rich organ in our body, which means it tells us more information than our nervous system. Like, it is, it's connected to our nervous system. But so anytime we're moving or changing position or even standing still and closing our eyes and feeling our body, that's because our fascia, the sensory endings in our fascia, are telling us, this is where I am in space. This is what my body is doing. So it's very, very important. And we've found with research that it's so interconnected with our emotions, with trauma, with stress responses. And so when I was talking about before, like you just said, Jana, and we're asking, the deep touch pressure, in sensory processing, deep touch pressure can be a really calming way to activate the rest and digest aspect of our nervous system. And that can be really hard, especially with, trauma, addiction. That was a huge driver for me personally with my own past with addiction. And learning about this just really helped to like take the shame out of it. Like, oh, there's nothing wrong. It's just, this is how my body responded to trauma. And then I used those responses, or I didn't know about what my body was telling me, and it was scary. And so then I used something to help make that feel better. So understanding, I do think, is really helpful in building that self-compassion when we're in recovery.
That is so interesting. Would you, share a little bit more about that process for you? So did you come to learn about this like through your academic studies and then realize the application to your own life and history, or how did that happen?
Oh, I love that question. It came through necessity. And I say that because I also identify as a highly sensitive person. If anyone's curious about that, that is actually a researched trait in 20% of across 100 species. Like, it's an actual trait. So just saying, like, if you're curious about that, look into it. There's some really great information out there. But I'm a highly sensitive person. I didn't know that. And when I got to a point in my early 20s where my early childhood trauma history caught up with me, and my body was definitely saying, something's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't function. I really got to a point of not being able to function. And gratefully, I was a really low threshold person, meaning with that high sensitivity,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't take that much discomfort. Like I didn't have to go to a really
The
low
deepest
bottom.
depths. Yeah. The deepest
Yeah,
depths of your own bottom.
exactly.
Yeah.
it was, it
That's
was,
an incredible reframe too about
mhm.
the benefit of being a
Yeah,
highly sensitive, that you were
totally.
so attuned that maybe had to be the place where you changed.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I really do see it that way today also in just reading more and understanding more about the trait. So yeah, it was necessity. I mean, my body was really, really hurting. I was using food as a drug, and I ended up going to a traditional Western medicine doctor, and he gave me a prescription. I think it was for depression or anxiety or
Mm-hmm.
something. And I just instinctively, I just had an intuition that that was not going to help, that was going to put a Band-Aid on it. So I threw the prescription out and I went to a school counselor on my college campus. He gave me a meditation tape, and it was just like, it clicked,
Mm-hmm.
and something in me knew that there was a different path. So that led me on the path of learning about yoga. And I've been a yoga practitioner for 25 years and taught for almost for 20. And so when you're practicing yoga, you're actually activating those proprioceptors. You're activating the deep touch pressure by weight bearing on your hands and lifting your
Mm.
body. And so I didn't know that then, but I learned about it experientially then. And then that, fast forward 10, 15 years, that just took me on the path of teaching yoga, becoming an OT, doing postgraduate studies in myofascial release, because I really felt like the sensory piece and the
Mm-hmm.
trauma and the physical body and the fascia piece from what I was being introduced to in the yoga realm and in occupational therapy school, it was just like very clear that was my path because of my experience, but also just it was inspiring to me. So
And
yeah.
what is that myofascial release? When you talk about that in the pressure points, like
Mhm.
what does that actually look like in practical
Yeah.
terms?
Yeah. Well, and I can share too more. I have videos on my website and like blogs on my website and all kinds of information for people to look at. Um, so myofascial release, when you're receiving it from a practitioner, it looks like hands on a part of your body, skin to
Mm-hmm.
skin. So let's say your thigh, um, putting down just enough pressure to get a little bit below the pressure of the skin, because
Mm-hmm.
there's a myofascial layer underneath, or fascial layer underneath the skin, and then moving the fascia just slightly until there's what's called a barrier. So where the fascia kind of expands or tensions a little bit more to where it can't move anymore, and you
Mm-hmm.
wait there. And the reason you wait is because that starts to generate heat, and then it starts to have a state change. So think of like chocolate can have state changes
Yeah.
where it can be a chocolate bar, but then it can be liquid chocolate.
Yep.
That's fascia. Fascia can be like a chocolate bar, like really stiff and hard,
Mm-hmm.
which we could talk about this too with perimenopause, why that's relevant. And then you apply heat to it, and the chocolate bar
Mm-hmm.
becomes liquid. So that's essentially what hands on are doing, but you have to do it very slow and very
Mm-hmm.
low load and gentle and take time, because it doesn't respond quickly. And then I'll also show you with self myofascial release, you can use tools
Mm.
like this. So these are like
Okay.
very specialized myofascial balls. And people have probably seen that online, different ways. I have a very particular way I teach it, because I do think that the gentleness is very, very important. Some people will do it a little bit rougher than I might suggest, but so you can do those same sort of techniques with myofascial balls too.
Wow. I have so many questions. I'm like, one part of my brain I want to go to, with the history of trauma and
Mhm,
addiction, many people have sensitivities naturally and,
mhm,
of course, protective of touch. How do you address people that don't want
mhm,
to be touched, or they're not
mhm,
ready to be touched in a safe therapeutic way?
mhm. 100%. So I work with a lot of people with trauma histories. That's actually what I prefer. I prefer helping people. And I often work with people and make sure they're also working with a mental health practitioner as well. So I don't just do myofascial release. Like I said, occupational therapy, we understand mental health, physical health, spiritual health,
Mm-hmm.
environmental health. It's all connected. So I'm not just coming in and doing one modality. I'm coming in and seeing, okay, what does this person need? So certainly consent is important. Like I ask people, I say, these are some ways we could take this session. And sometimes it could just be we're sitting in chairs next to each other or across from each other, and I'm leading them through a somatic tracking practice or a breathing practice. I could also, if they don't want hands-on work, teach them how to do it on themselves. And then I just talk them through it. I might watch them move to determine where their areas of restriction are instead of doing hands-on assessments, which I also do. And I also bring in body-mind dialoguing and like inner child dialoguing. So being able to learn how to access the parts of us that are, maybe louder than others.
Mm-hmm.
And I will bring that into the work also when it's appropriate and refer people out if they need to go, deeper into like some unburdening of something more traumatic. So, yeah.
So interesting. And then thank you for sharing that part. I'm curious too, like with addiction, you had mentioned like food addiction, and we know a
Yeah.
lot of food addiction is very deeply related to our relationship with ourself and our own body. And then I hear you also talking about, I don't know if it's like the subtleness or the you mentioned like with the pressure being very thoughtful about it being lighter. And I think with a lot of addictions, it's so much about like it's not a moderate process being an active addiction. There's nothing moderate about it. So how do you go from that pressure and addiction to doing this, like it sounds like very slow, deliberate healing practice?
Yeah. Well, I will say that I could give an example of a client actually that I had that's been with me for about 3 years. She had a really, really intense assault trauma, and she didn't really trust any practice. For some reason, she felt really called to work with me, and she just didn't trust a lot of other practitioners for some reason. And I think a part of it might have been just a knowing that I have the history that I've had experientially, but also like the actual clinical and professional experience that I have combined. I have a sense that that might have just helped create that safety for her. But I remember like that whole first year working with her, she was so disconnected from her body and on hyperverbal, like going a million miles an hour. And how I work with that is I just accept it. Like, okay, you're going to talk through this whole session and I'm going to do a little bit of work. I mean, she was totally fine with hands-on. I'm going to do some work, and just through the work, even if she's not totally tuning in, it's shifting her nervous system. So she's going to feel that. She's going to have a sense of like, oh, I'm a little bit more grounded leaving here. I'm a little more connected. And, today this woman comes in, like falls asleep on the table and like, snoring and doesn't talk. And, so like, it really just, it's the same approach as with fascia. You just honor where something is and you just shift it a little bit and you just hold the boundary and wait. And you don't try to force things to occur. That's just the primary like way I work with that.
And I'm thinking about, it's also sort of, the great reality that we're all in is we're all aging every single, not just day, but every single moment. And thinking about that relationship, like the slow and subtlety of like literally every second we're all aging and changing. So doing that healing at that level is very interesting. How have you seen your practice change just in yourself in your own aging? We talk a lot about perimenopause and both of us being here in this space. How has that changed you professionally?
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's definitely slowed me down in a really positive, super positive way. Slowed me down, meaning I'm not slowed down in like what I can do actually with my physical body. I mean, I surf regularly. I love surfing. I think it's great for fascia, great for perimenopause. great for mental health, physical health. But professionally, and also just personally, the way this work has changed me is it's really helped me to be aware of my own parts, in thinking about parts work, right? Like,
Yep.
I'm aware of, am I really in self energy? Like, am I in that like big bird's eye view energy when I'm with someone? Or am I trying to am I in a place more of trying to fix this? Like, I'm very aware of that. I'm very aware if I switch and I can bring myself back into like big bird's eye view. I mean, in your work, isn't there a term that you use? It's like positive, like constant positive regard, or like
Like
something
holding
like,
someone in that positive constant
yeah,
regard.
yeah. It makes me think of that, like,
Mm-hmm.
the therapist that I've worked with. And so that for sure, I feel like those soft skills, which are like such important skills, that has definitely changed. And it's just helped me to like always be curious, like keep learning. If someone asks me a question and I don't really know, or if there's something going on with someone that I'm not really sure what's going on, I trust that their body actually knows, or that I
Mm-hmm.
might be able to talk to a colleague and just like get curious, and not think that, like, not create more of that white coat syndrome of like one person has all the answers, and
Expert and yeah.
because that doesn't create a space for healing at all. It's like, how do you hold a really clear boundary and like coherent space, like a priestess, but how do you also, not be in a hierarchy? So I think that would be
Mhm.
probably one of the biggest, like the soft skills that have
Mhm. Sort of
changed.
come from probably too also just the years of practice, the cumulative practice. And I know you are a licensed occupational therapist in the state
Mhm.
of California.
Mhm.
So I always find that interesting too, this relationship we have maybe as healers, somatic practitioners, and the licensing, that your experience, like you said, your professional experience, your academic experience, whatever it took you in California, sort of to get licensed to put this, for a lot of people, that puts like some validity on it, that
Mhm.
this
Mhm.
work that we're doing has this evidence behind it. It has the state seal of approval, all those things.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting sometimes with this kind of work. Um, when we think more too about like life changes, all of us aging, men and women, as we all age, we know the hormone shifts for both men and women
Mhm.
change drastically throughout our lifespan. But we, have a lot of peak during adolescence, and then again this I call like perimenopause, like the second adolescence.
Mhm.
And we know too, again, for men too, there's a lot of physical changes, whether it's hair loss, testosterone dropping, all these things that affect both our physical body, our musculature, the way we show up in the world physically, and then mental health.
Mhm.
It's so real. And I
Mhm.
think for people in recovery, when you get this point of stability, maybe after you've gotten, whether it's sober or abstinent or wherever you are in your path, there's this like hope of equanimity, and then here come like hormones or
Yeah.
life, so how do you utilize occupational therapy to address those
Yeah.
things?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, just to relate to anyone listening who, is experiencing that, whether you're a woman experiencing perimenopause or menopause, or a man, experiencing changes as you age, and is that, I'm at that age. I'm 43, and I didn't realize I had that shift until about 40, that I was like, oh, the last 2 years I've been in perimenopause. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
why I've felt so incredibly moody, like
Yep.
intense mood swings, so intense. I mean, like nothing before. So I really had to learn how to be an occupational therapist for myself, and start to look at my routines and make some changes. And some of the changes I have made now that I've learned more about perimenopause and what's happening, um, is knowing that having more resistive work is really important. I mean, I said I surf, so that is really good actually for
Mm-hmm.
building bone health and just mobility in general. But I bought like a weight vest and I put that on now when I do yoga. Like I do yoga every morning. I have for 20 years. But I put that on and I add a little bit of weight. So just like little things, but also one of the things I've noticed, and I think Jenna, we were talking about this when we were preparing, is, the fatigue and just getting stressed and being more sensitive, is that I have experience working with people who have different sensory needs, and just, again, looking at life through the lens of an occupational therapist is like, okay, so yeah, we have to create some changes in our routine. And one of the ways that I've done that for myself is making sure that I'm not doing like a day where it's like all back to back. Like
Yeah.
I'm really, really good now at making spaces between things so that I can take a movement pause, so I can just take a couple breaths, so I can like recalibrate, versus having everything jam packed in. So that's something I'm like the queen of no in a lot of ways now. I'm really good at saying no.
You are. We'll just say Jahara has been our hardest podcast guest to book. She did stretch this out, make us wait. And I love that you were very strategic about it. You're like,
Yeah.
this is how I want to strategize this a few months out. And we planned a time that worked. I guess too, like, how do you maintain like the work you do as an occupational therapist with this thoughtfulness in such a fast-paced world? Because I look at like the healthcare world, and I know you've worked in a lot of different healthcare milieus, and that is not a place of slow it down. It's a place of go, go, go.
Yeah. And when I first got out of graduate school, I did work in a traditional setting, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. I lasted with that for about a year and a half. Like literally, I was like, nope, this does not work for me. And I ended up going down to like 4 days and doing 7-hour days. I started building my private practice. I just knew I needed to have more control over my schedule. So I do feel like I was primed for perimenopause and these changes. In a way, I was starting to learn how to, and being highly sensitive. Again, it was just like necessity. As a highly sensitive person, I already am different than like 80% of the people in the world. On top of that, we do live, like you said, in a really fast-paced reality. So I'm very intentional about, I've chosen also not to have kids. My husband and I chose not to have children. We have 2 amazing dogs, but that was a hard choice. And it was one of the reasons I made that choice was because of, again, like my high sensitivity. And I knew I just needed my life to look a little bit different to support my nervous system and my sensory system. So did I answer your question?
Yeah.
What are you asking?
No.
Okay.
And it does sort of also, I think it's really important to note, coming from history of trauma, of whatever we want to call it. I don't want to say body abuse, but coming from a history with a challenging relationship with our body, a trauma history, to be able to choose is so important, to have those thoughtful choice points of whether it's your daily schedule, or you said like making a really thoughtful choice again about whether you're going to have kids or not. That I think is very empowering, that even from histories where we came from not having choice, you can work to cultivate that life that gives you the opportunities to make space and choice.
I love that. That's such a great point, Jenna. Yeah.
Well, in closing, you gave us some actionable steps, but what is like one thing that anyone that's listening could do without cost to incorporate some occupational therapy in their life?
Yeah. Well, I'll speak to specifically somatic occupational therapy and weave in just supporting your fascia, especially as we age. Our connective tissue can get a little bit denser and drier. So 2 things you can do. One is when you wake up in the morning is to do a full body yawn stretch and allow that yawn stretch to like be organic, like let it move in multiple directions. The reason for that is it's both really good for the nervous system and just like regulating it in an easy way. That's very, very natural for our bodies to do. But it also primes our fascia. Like it primes the fascia by putting it on a little bit of tension while activating it. And that's the way fascia operates. So that would be one thing. And you can do that multiple times through the day.
And
the
animals
other
do. Like
animals do
animals
it.
do,
Yeah.
like cats and
Yeah.
dogs do that all
Yeah.
day long.
It's so,
So,
it's called pendiculation. That's like the
oh,
scientific word for it. It's
pendiculation.
very, very, yeah, it's instinctual. So when you find yourself wanting to yawn, actually yawn. Don't like cover your mouth or like try to make it small, like yawn, because that's going to help your nervous system regulate. It's like your body's trying to regulate. So let that happen. And then also, the best you can, just micro movements all through the day. Get up, do like multiple directions. Like our fascia wants to move in all directions. So like do a little twist, do a little extension and flexion, do a little side bend. And it can be really small. Like you don't have to, if you're in your office, it could just be like, but stand up and do it. And do that like as many times as you get the thought, like, oh, my body might need to move right now. Just do it for like 10 seconds and then do it again 30 minutes later. I mean, that honestly, if you're going to do anything for your connective tissue and your nervous system health, would be and also just to start listening to your body. Like when it gives you those cues, it's actually giving you a cue for a reason. It's your fascia trying to say like, hey, we've been sitting we're getting really dense here.
So Jahara, this is really interesting. I'm hearing like it can be an individual practice you can do yourself. You can do it with you in your office or an occupational therapist. But what about community? I know you lead retreats and such. Like, how do you do occupational therapy or somatic work like this in a retreat or
Yeah.
with others?
Yeah. Yeah. So the retreats that I lead and the workshops that I provide to my community are a combination of more traditional yoga that people are often more familiar with. I'll usually open up with that. And then I'll teach people how to do self myofascial release with the myofascial tools, the balls that I was showing you, the tune up fitness balls here. And then I'll also teach people how to do clinical somatic movement, which is a neuromuscular re-education, which helps with muscles that are getting chronically tense. I target specific muscles to help teach the mind and the body to have that connection where it's not chronically being in a mode of being tense. So I teach that as a group, and I'll do all three and I'll weave them together. And so my retreats are 4 days. They're in Santa Margarita, California, at a beautiful retreat center. It's like a family-owned retreat center. It's so sweet. And in that weekend, we do a lot of myofascial release, and people leave feeling like they're, like jelly. So
That sounds incredible. Can I ask, are they pretty sober friendly?
yeah, oh yeah. There's, I think every so often they'll bring in like some wine, but I don't ever it's all vegetarian food and very, very quiet and very, very restful. And it's beautiful, a beautiful location.
What are the benefits of practicing this kind of work in a retreat or like with other people? Like, why would you want to do this with others as opposed to just with your therapist?
Yeah, great. Well, specifically with the retreats, there's opportunities I do circling and sharing and journaling. And for a lot of people, because our fascia is connected to our emotions, it can bring up emotions. So if there's been an area of the body that's really been stuck and in a pattern, if we then release that area, it can bring up some sadness or just grief usually is what will come through. And so in a group, that provides a space for me to hold safety for people to share. I mean, and it's really the group energy at the end of the retreat, especially people just feel like, oh my gosh, I'm connecting with other people and doing this together. I'm not, just doing this solo healing journey. I'm actually engaged with other people doing the same thing. So it's really powerful to have that community component.
Yeah. Being watched, I think, and being bear witness. And then also I think there is collective healing when you're with other people that are working on healing themselves to be in community like that, even just the bodies together. It's pretty profound. So thank you so much. I feel like we learned so much. Pendiculation, fascia, and If you're interested in hearing or learning more about Jahara and her practice in California, you can look at the link in the comments below to get a direct link to her website where she has a blog of all things somatic occupational therapy.
Yeah, so I have my website is radiance-therapy.com, and Jana will be posting it in the show notes. And I also have Instagram, Facebook, where I post videos and reels with free information for how to do self-myofascial release for yourself. On my website, it gives you information about the retreats that I do throughout the year, which people come from all over the country, all over the world to come to the retreats in California. So you're welcome to look that up on my website. And there's a couple other podcasts also that I've been interviewed on that where I go into a lot of depth about like trauma and fascia. So feel free to just get all that information on my website to learn more if you're curious.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, Mountainside can help. Call 860-365-6764 to speak with our caring treatment team.